off. It's getting sober on us. It's not going to be the
Yeah,
same.
the propofol is wearing off.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Three Body Problem. We have reached episode 32. We've reached
32.
episode 32. And I missed
a
you
round
guys
number.
last week.
Against all odds, we've made it. Dude, yeah, it was weird. Like, thank Dennis for coming. Thank God that he had it. But it was strange not having Conspiracy Ryan around. Like, we got away with so much shit, unquestioned, just, you know.
My thanks to Dennis Fisher for holding the fort down last week. I was out in San Francisco, this nebula fog thing. Juanito, you missed a good one. I think this was right up
God,
your alley with
I
like
would have
some of the
loved to do that.
hacking
Yeah.
into stuff. I saw guys working on some interesting projects. Let's go to Mr. Costin, who is hopped up on Propofil. What is going on with you? How are you feeling, my friend?
Like episode 32 reminds me of a Romanian joke, which may or may not be appropriate for the podcast. So,
This
like
is Costin I want. Keep going
two
before
programmers
you wears off.
talking to
We're
each
getting
other, and like
canceled.
one is,
Episode
"Hey
32 is
man,
the last one.
can I borrow like $500 from you?" And the other one's like, "Here's 512 to make it a round number." So we're like episode 32, round number.
Beautiful.
I am going to call this the DeepSeek edition because I think in our prep for this show, it's just like all DeepSeek all the time. And I want to start at the very top for like just a handful of folks who haven't been really following all the shenanigans around what DeepSeek is. Costin, can I start with you? Just at a very, very high level. What is this DeepSeek hype that everyone is talking about?
Yeah, it's interesting because we put this last week, but we didn't have enough time to go into the topic. And I think it was actually better because there was maybe a little bit of material last week, but this week we have a lot of things happening related to DeepSeek. And I'll start by just saying something which attracted my attention last week, which was the reason I put it in there, that this is actually a very powerful thing. What surprised me is that I used DeepSeek, which is essentially just yet another AI LLM, which is on par with the best models, the Chat GPT, the best Chat GPT models of the moment, like the expensive ones. And in some cases, it is superior, or better said, it was superior. So at least last week when I was playing with it, I asked to extract IOCs from a number of blog posts, structure them.
Typical thing you'll do with ChatGPT paid
extrapolate.
version.
Yeah, but extrapolate the threat actor name. And in the past, like doing the same with ChatGPT, it had like some flaws. Like for instance, it wouldn't extract all the IOCs, only some of them. And I was like very precise. Please extract all the IPs, all the domains, host names, hashes, URLs, and sometimes it wouldn't see all of them for some reason. But DeepSeek was like formidable. It extracted everything, put it into a very nice CSV table. It extrapolated the actor name correctly. It was like super impressive, and I was like, wow, this is like on par, maybe even a bit better than ChatGPT 01, like the latest of the greatest of the latest.
What you just described there is a typical use case for you. That this is what you're
Yeah.
paying ChatGPT for, right? And what is that? You mentioned it
This
doesn't
and
extract all the
Romanian
ISP.
jokes.
Does it mean that you have to do a lot more manual double checking after ChatGPT versus here, where you've kind of like it's made it a lot more efficient?
I mean, I've been integrating ChatGPT API into some of my processes for a couple of months already. Like the smaller models, the mini models, like the cheaper ones. To be honest, I'm not like a rich guy with $500 billion budget to extract IOCs from public blogs.
Bro, it's $200 a month. It's $200.
No, yeah, but if you use the API,
You spend more on
it's
iPhones.
dynamic. The API is dynamic, right? So it depends how many tokens you query and so on. So actually, with the API, it was super cheap. Trust me, it was like $14 per month, and processing.
You can make it
a lot
even
of stuff.
cheaper.
I can probably make it cheaper.
You can do batch queries now. Like there's a bunch of stuff there, like where.
But like, what was my issue was that sometimes the results were inconsistent. Like sometimes it just works, and in other cases, on the same input, it doesn't. Like it produces it produces the output like in a different format than the one that I expected, although I was very clear that I want the output exactly in this format so then I can machine parse it. So again, I've been playing with this for a while because it's integrated in my IOC extraction processes is now on VT for other things I'm doing. And yeah, this is what DeepSeek, why DeepSeek impressed me. Because asking the same question, it was very, very fast and very, very accurate. Super, super accurate. At least it was like that a week ago when I played with it.
You think
And
they're messing
Juan,
with it behind the scenes?
They are. So this is the second part is that they are doing something with it. So
wait. You guys are going way too fast. We're going too fast. Let me kind of like set the stage for us. Juan, this initial reaction from Costin, this wow reaction, is what
Right.
spoke the industry in general. Can
Yeah.
you kind of give me a sense of, because there are multiple flavors of DeepSeek. There's open source. There's
Yeah.
you can run it locally. There's an app. There's some privacy security
Right.
concerns with data going to China. Can you set that up for me? And as I understand it, there's like 5 flavors of it: the official app,
Yeah.
the official API, a random data center hosting the model as an API, a reputable cloud hosting the model as an API like Anthropic and so on. I'm hearing that they're
Right.
also doing it, and then hosting the model locally or on-prem. So there's different flavors that come with it, different threat models and different concerns. Help us understand, like, did you also have this wow reaction? And explain to the folks what set off all this controversy over the last week.
Okay, so I definitely had a bit of a wow reaction, but it was more in the sense of watching somebody else kind of play catch up because I've been wowed by OpenAI's reasoning models for a while now. So I've been using O1, and you know, as we talked about a lot in the podcast, I've been paying for O1 Pro. Just to, like, you know, really try it out. And frankly, I think it's phenomenal. I think it's like, you have to figure out what you're using it for, but there's a massive difference between your normal LLMs, the generative stuff that we got used to with, like, you know, 3.5 and 4.0 and Claude stuff, you know, Opus and whatever you want to call it. And then actually, I think I meant Sonnet, but in any case, and then OpenAI's new chain of thought or reasoning models, which we have O1 now. The $200 subscription has O1 Pro, and we're gonna get O3 Mini, O3, etc. soon. The
And
big
that
difference,
description there is like when you click on the thinking, another thing pops up that explains and provides context of what's going back. Is it accurate though? Because I'm hearing folks saying it's all bullshit there too.
No. It's really good, but like, what you need to understand is, like, they look the same, but these are different tools for different problems. If you just need something to, like, generate some code for you, etc., like, the old models are fine. The new reasoning models, what they're doing, and the reason they're more expensive is you basically have this agentic approach where it stops, like, you ask it a question, and in the background it's basically kicking off like 30 different queries. One of them is like evaluating how to answer the question. The other one is, well, who would be the best people to evaluate the question? And then it goes, okay, so I'm gonna basically transparently, without you seeing it, it's going, okay, I'm gonna issue one query where I pretend to be an expert in this. I'm gonna issue another query where I'm an expert in that, and then they basically talk to each other, and then there's another thing that reevaluates the quality of the answer. So it's the reason it's so expensive is they are quietly running like 30 different queries for you and then synthesizing the answer and coming back with just like a much more quote unquote thought out response of, you know, what you're asking for. So it's not what you want to use for like simple evaluative, you know, simple problems or like small tasks, coding stuff. It's expensive for you. Don't do it that way. It's slower. But for example, I have taken like a whole blue sky thread of something that I'm just like thinking about, some random bullshit, and had O1 Pro turn it into 60-70% of an academic paper in 3 queries.
With good
Right?
quality.
extremely good quality, and like it giving me insights about things that I hadn't thought about and things that I should consider. And then like at one point I was like, hey, like I feel like there's some mathematical thing that we could formalize here, but I don't know how to do the math. And it goes, oh, 1 second, and it fucking like figures it out. It goes, oh, here's the formula in latex, and then like this is what each symbol means, and this is how you could use it. Like it's a different level of response.
Can I interrupt you and ask just
Yeah,
one, I think, very
of course.
important question which I asked you before in our chat? What impressed me with DeepSeek was the fact that this reasoning, it was very detailed and you could see it, like
Yeah,
the thinking process. Do you
yeah.
get the same from the $200 subscription with
N-
ChatGPT, or
Not as
you don't see
overtly.
it? You only
You
see
get
like I'm thinking, I'm asking others, I am doing that, I am
if you
what,
yeah if
but
you
you don't
click
see
it,
the full chain of thought.
it gives you a sort of top-down summary. I'm pretty sure on the API side that you can it's a setting where you can basically tell it to show you its reasoning. I also want to point out, so like I want to point out a couple of different things here, because um, there's things that are not clearly explained that you become aware of the more you play with these models, and especially the more you like. I haven't really paid as much attention to Anthropic. I've never really been thrilled with it. But I feel like I've been chronicling OpenAI's development since the beginning, right? Like I got to be in
Actually,
the
the word is
beta.
shilling, but go ahead.
I've been shilling for open. No, I'm genuinely impressed with their work, and like I got to be there. Like I started using it at the beta. They were kind enough to like involve me in the safety testing for like 4, and like so I got to watch a lot of the like. Okay, we're gonna use the preview version. We're gonna use the one they came up with today. We're gonna use, oh, they just came out with a new model. It's different in the API if we change the system prompt. Like I've just kind of gotten to play with enough of those tools. Um, to at least get kind of an intuitive sense of some of the levers that are getting pulled in the background. And I think that's important. Um, Effectively, we need to draw a big, like, dividing line here in, are you evaluating a model through the front end, as in like the website, or are you evaluating a model through the API? I'm like, I'm drawing this hard line there because on the website, on the sort of chat app, there's a bunch of levers that OpenAI or now the DeepSeek guys can pull and are pulling and changing without telling you. So, for example, the temperature of the model, which is really important, like that's how deterministic the model is, right? If the temperature is 0, you're getting the same answer every time you ask it the same question. So usually for something conversational, the temperature is set to like a 0.5, a 0.6, which is why you ask it the same question 10 times and you get 10 different answers. They can fuck with that, and they do. For example, when you turn on search and it does online searching, it's the temperature is set to near 0, which is why you get repetitive answers. It's not as creative, but the whole point is they're trying to avoid hallucinations. They're trying to avoid it just like making shit up. They want it to respond on the basis of the RAG from the internet.
Do you think they can set that temperature by user?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they could. There's no reason why they couldn't, but I don't know. Like, look, it's not a nefarious thing, right? If you go into playground.openai.com, you can change the
I
temperature and
see.
you can change what you want. It's about finding a sweet spot. And I'm sure that what OpenAI is doing is like they're testing and gaming. For example, in that chain of thought thing where you're running 30 queries, like what should the temperature be for these different ones? What kind of, which one should get access to like RAG? Which one should be getting access to other information versus not? Like they're doing all of that without showing the user. DeepSeek is showing a little bit more of that chain of thought, and I think people really like that, which is cool. I mean, OpenAI can take notice and show a little bit more of your work. People will enjoy that. I think the issue with what Costin is describing about like, hey, the answers were better yesterday and worse today, is something that I've suspected OpenAI has done in like really high volume days. Like the time when they were like, you remember back in the day when you would go in and it was like, hey, ChatGPT is
Yeah,
not
it's
available right
unavailable.
now.
Right.
Well, I have this deep suspicion that there have been times when OpenAI has been trying to answer queries that were sent to O1 with O1 Mini, just to see if people could tell, just to see if the responses were as good, or because they can't handle the volume of whatever. And I wouldn't be surprised as DeepSeek, which is now going from like a niche project to getting fucking hammered internationally through like apps and websites and APIs and everything if they're struggling to have the right kind of infrastructure and they're maybe making some tweaks and choices behind the scenes.
One note here, which I think is also important. Some of the people I talked to were saying that this reasoning process, the one that actually DeepSeek shows and ChatGPT only shows partially, right? Thinking, finding another way, thinking again. They said like the inner workings, they're actually a trade secret for OpenAI. So it's a
Yeah.
trade secret, meaning they will not show it, they will not expose it to the internet. So to me, it was like kind of the first surprising thing here was why would they make this like publicly available when OpenAI thinks it's a trade secret? What can be the goal here to make this valuable process in the end, to make it fully kind of open and public? Like what's
You mean
what's
by the
idea?
DeepSeek folk?
Yeah, by the DeepSeek folks,
So
exactly.
there's a really big fight happening in the AI world, and it doesn't have to do only with China. Like it's happening in the U.S. with U.S. companies, primarily between OpenAI and Meta, when it comes to these LLMs. Effectively, OpenAI is banking on having greater expertise and resources and essentially just being better at building these systems, using these systems, coming up with like cool, clever techniques like, taking advantage of recursion and taking advantage of, agentic stuff. Like these things have been happening at OpenAI a bit, I suspect, earlier than they were in a lot of other places. And the you have to consider sort of their advantage originally, like all the big first movers, their big advantage was we have the data and the money and the know-how to train these ginormous models, and it costs us millions of dollars to do the training. And that was supposed to be the moat that was going to keep people from catching up with them. And then what happens, Meta really sets sort of the starting gun off, whether they intended to or not, because around, I want to say it's like Llama 2 or Llama 3, Meta open sources the weights for their model. And that was a insane move at the time. People were like, they thought they you're going crazy. But if you consider that OpenAI is sort of like the king and they're going to be ahead of everybody else no matter what, and they made this big play with Microsoft for infrastructure, and like they're just kind of like moving by leaps and bounds. What Meta did was strategically devalue their offering in the beginning, but effectively devalue the first mover advantage that OpenAI had. And so what you do is you put these really expensive, like it takes so much to train the model, but once you have the weights, you can just hand them off to anybody else. And people, like, I run these models. I run Llama 3.2 B Tulu whatever, quantized to whatever the fuck, on my MacBook, on like locally on my, and yeah, it's a
Yeah,
beefy
but you don't have a
laptop, but
normal
like,
MacBook.
no, but dude, it's not, I'm not running around with like a fucking H1000, right? Like it's a MacBook. It's a laptop that fits in my backpack that is running this model, like fucking 50 gigs in memory. Yeah, sure. But like it's running it and it works. I'm not paying millions of dollars to train it. So that was basically, that's where you see sort of the politics playing out between these companies, where you've got the closed source ones who think that like they're, training these frontier models is going to be the way forward, and then coming up with cool techniques is where they're going to show their strength. And then you've got other folks who are saying, yeah, fuck you, we can't beat you on the technique stuff, but we can open source the model itself, devaluing your offering, and then we can take advantage of all of the open source community's inventiveness in coming up with these techniques. So you come up with chain of thought, well, somebody at LangChain just figured out how to do chain of thought, and they have a model, they have a really good model because we open sourced it. So, you move forward. I think people are freaking the fuck out because now you've got somebody open sourcing a reasoning model, a chain of thought model, and that's not something anybody had done yet. So it's yet again somebody kind of like chiseling at this advantage that people have created for themselves. But I don't know, man. Like nobody wanted to like. We didn't try to set Facebook headquarters on fire because they open source Llama. Um, what are we mad about with DeepSeek?
Let
Like,
me
what's the problem?
let me lay out the two issues at play as I
Right.
see it. Maybe there are more issues at play, but there are two issues that I play. One is the obvious privacy worries about data being sent to China. And that's why I started off this show by describing the various layers of what DeepSeek is: the official app, the official API, the ones that are, the ones that are more likely being used in organizations, and adding to shadow IT now is people just going to the browser and logging in and doing it in the browser, which comes with a massive privacy security risk of data going to China. And then
To
there's the
China,
obvious.
because like we were
Wait a
doing
second.
this.
Yes, the idea that DeepSeek is Chinese is the big part of this thing.
Right.
The DeepSeek privacy policy basically says we store the information we collect in secure servers located in the People's Republic of China. We just went through this with TikTok. We are like, whiplash from trying to figure out what China is really, sucking up from our networks. Costin, let's talk about that right there. Is there you're running it locally? Would you recommend anyone run the app and use it in the browser?
Well, I mean, it depends what kind of questions you're asking. Again, it's very important to keep in mind here that you cannot use DeepSeek without logging in first. So you need to log in. You can log in with your Google account. You can log in with like a custom account, but you cannot use it without logging in with an account. So that means that everything that you ask, everything that you query, if you upload something, they will all be associated with your account. So that will, in time, create a profile, and it can be used for all sorts of nefarious reasons. I'm not saying that they will use it for that. I'm just saying it can. I mean, this is one of the potential risks here.
And they mentioned this in the
This
privacy
wait,
policy. Go ahead,
I'm
Juan.
laughing here because like, look, I'm not saying this is all fine. I'm not saying that there's nothing wrong, but this is a similar scenario to all the social media discussion we've been having lately, where you go, oh no, like TikTok's terrible, whatever. Like you go, okay, what are they doing? It's like, well, they're doing the same thing that Instagram does, and you go, and the problem is what?
China.
Right. Like but my point is, like, we are having a hilarious conversation about DeepSeek right now, because the hypocrisy is like,
Oh, we'll get
it's
to the hypocrisy with
oh my
OpenAI as well in a second.
but
Hold on.
look, but my point here is like, my point here is particularly when it comes to the what are they going to do with the data from the chat. Let's remember that the generative AI revolution was kicked off by OpenAI creating a free chat GPT like portal where we could all log in and have these conversations and be impressed by it. And people thought, oh my God, like they're dying for us to use their product, which is why they're showing it to us for free. And they're like, no, bro, they want to use they want to see how you're going to use it so they can further train and decide how they're going to take their strategy going forward.
And they've spelled it out in the privacy policy. I just want to read a couple of things. I mentioned they store the information in quote unquote secure servers in the People's Republic of China. And they say, we may collect your text or audio input, prompt, uploaded files, feedback, chat history, or any content that you provide to our model and services. Juan, you were saying this is par for the course with everyone. And this comes from the app or the website. This is not if you're running it locally.
There is a difference there on the models. Like, just to like I really, when I said we had to put a division between the model on the website and the model on the API, I really should have said, a tripartite division. There's a third version, which is also what people are freaking the fuck out about, which is there is DeepSeek. What we're talking about is DeepSeek R1, because there was an older model V3 that's not good. DeepSeek R1 is the chain of thought model, and they open sourced DeepSeek R1 Lite. It's not
so
the full
calling
thing.
it an open source thing has some nuance.
It definitely has nuance, but the way that I'm thinking about it is like OpenAI has O1 Pro is the hardcore version, and then they have O1 Mini, which is the cheap version. And it's for like quicker stuff. It's not as accurate, but cool. I think of it as like DeepSeek has DeepSeek R1, which I guess is like their O1 equivalent. And then what they've open sourced, I'm assuming, would be the equivalent of like the O1 Mini or R1 Mini. So it's not like you're not going to get the same results as you would on the website or the API with DeepSeek. But
So
again,
running it locally is a deprecate is a poorer version than running it in the cloud.
it's a poorer version, and it might even be twice as much of a poorer version, because the only versions I have seen are
Interesting.
DeepSeek R1 Lite distilled to another model like Llama or Quen.
Oh,
So
yeah,
you're
yeah.
not, yeah, dude. Like this is a fucking it's
My
insane.
head is exploding. Slow down. And if you're using the app and if you're using the website, I just wanted to finish up this very quickly. You're sending your any information that you use to set up your account, including email address, phone number, date of birth, usernames, and a bunch of other things. In addition, I think there was I read a piece on Wired where they did a review of the underlying activity and found that DeepSeek was also sending data to Baidu, which is a Chinese, search company, and a company called Volsys, a Chinese internet infrastructure firm. So like this, the privacy policy lays all of this out. Costin, is this a legitimate worry for you?
I mean, look, I'm thinking about it in the kind of the global picture here. Like, look at your kids. Maybe not in the US, but look at your kids in general. What do they have on their phones? They have TikTok. Okay, now they have DeepSeek as well. They have Alibaba. They have Shein. I don't know how popular Shein is in the US, but like over here,
Never heard of it.
everybody has Shein or
The
Shein
fuck is
or how.
that? What are they?
Shein is like
SHEIN. It's like an apparel company. They're like
it's like
kind
a
of like a
cheap
Temu.
clothing.
Yeah.
Well, cheap, but somehow let's say quality in the sense that it's cheap, but at the same time the stuff that you buy there is decent quality. Is not like trash.
Yeah, their ads are all over Instagram and the local. Like I mean,
Everybody has it. Like everybody, all the teenagers here, everybody has it.
Damn
so this
kids.
is just another bit of Chinese thing on their phones.
Temu, like surely you have Temu,
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah.
So like if you just compare your phone from today to your phone, like your children's phone from 5 years ago, and what do you see? There's suddenly like half a dozen Chinese apps on the phone, and it's not just they're there, but they are using these apps on a daily basis. It kind of shapes the way they do things, how they buy clothes. They buy from China instead of buying from like local producer and so on and so on. Like they send their data to China. It's part, I think, if you ask me, it's part of a bigger issue here, a bigger problem that suddenly, like for the past 5 years, there's a shift in how China is catching up with all sorts of different things, not only in one category, but AI, like social media. Now TikTok is banned. Maybe people were running to Red Note. I know a lot of people using WeChat. So I know a lot of people who are using these Chinese services. And it feels like it's, how do you call it? It's like slow boiling the frog. That's the metaphor.
Yeah.
That's what is happening.
How much of that do you think is due to Chinese catching up, like you mentioned, like real innovation and IP theft that we've been covering for many, many years over the last decade, finally making it into the private sector hands and emerging as actual technologies? Do you think there's a direct linkage there?
I think it was, well, actually, maybe not. It's not a good idea to name him, but like a very important person who made a presentation.
Propofol working?
Propofol is working very well. The person that shall not be named.
Let him.
He said that in China there's no such thing as stealing information. Like copying is not stealing. When you copy the information, that's not theft. You're just it's a sign of respect. If you look in all the
furthering the
Confucianism,
scientific research,
like
right?
all the apprentices, like whenever they go to a master to learn about philosophy, writing, and so on, like the first thing they learn is to copy the master or to copy the works of the great masters. Like you learn to be a very good copyist, like to copy paintings, to copy calligraphy, to copy all sorts of literature, and that is not theft. It's a sign of respect. So copying the masters is a sign of respect. This is like the underlying philosophy.
I mean, think about what that entails, right? Like it's a matter of skill whether you can actually emulate this great technique, right? And what you talked about is passing down technique. And frankly, I think that battle is raging on the AI side of things. And we've watched, admittedly, the AI people are not the smartest people on earth. It takes them a while to figure some things out that the rest of us can see quite openly. One of those has been this notion that they could effectively steal from the rest of the world with impunity to create this new future. And now they want to talk about like the importance of intellectual property ownership when it comes to what they've created, because they think their wonderful future is one that needs to be controlled by them in order to be safe, right? Like that was the bullshit they were peddling for like AI regulation and all this crap, right? They were lying to us about how somehow these fucking tools in San Francisco who have no empathy for anyone on earth think that they are the ultimate arbiters of how human civilization and development should somehow work, and that the way that we're going to be safe is it's going to be in their control. They're the only ones that can make decisions. It's going to be fucking fantastic. And then, damn it, these damn Chinese people just show up with their strategies, and they just start doing exactly what we're doing, and fuck them. Like, dude, look, I am not turning a blind eye to the US-China thing, and I'm not saying we're just like them and they're just like us. None of that false equivalency shit. We just don't have much of a leg to stand on this one, because OpenAI doesn't have a leg to stand on, nor does Google, nor does anybody else. And somehow Meta is looking fucking phenomenal right now because they kind of got ahead of the curve in essentially saying there's no way we can A, compete with the big boys by ourselves, and B, there's no way we can control this technology actually. So why not lead in pushing the development forward in the open source space? And that's where you devalue the technique, right? You don't need to go to the master in the temple in a mountain in the middle of fucking nowhere when everybody's kind of coming up with their own kung fu, right? Like, and some of it is actually quite good, right? Like LangChain is a sizable project, and all it has been doing from day one is taking lesser capabilities or taking APIs or whatever and building all the infrastructure around it that existed within OpenAI and within Anthropic, and making it open source to everybody. So you want agents, there's a LangChain element for that. You want RAG, there's a LangChain. You want to connect it to the internet, LangChain. You got, like, they've basically just been building an ecosystem out of these models.
Never stop ranting, my friend. Very, very quickly, I want to point out that China does not have the moral high ground, and I want to just kind of steer the conversation back to my question of how much of this is driven by IP theft that we've seen over the years. It's been decades of us reporting all these APT reports on Chinese espionage actors who were stealing blueprints and stealing companies' code and giving it to Chinese companies to compete. How much of what we're seeing here with all these emerging technologies, China is better, the kids are all running to Chinese apps, is innovation, is like legitimate copying? Everyone copies from each other. There's nothing really new in technology. And how much of this you think is directly tied to the IP theft thing, which is segues into the national security concern and some of the other things we'll get into in a little bit?
Look, it's intellectual property. It's intellectual property theft all the way down, right? Like in Spanish, we say, a thief that steals from a thief gets 1,000 years of forgiveness, right? Like
That's not Spanish.
I understand, but I'm not
Tell
I'm
me
not
it in
feeding those
Spanish.
flames. Ladrón que roba ladrón tiene 100 años de perdón, 1000 años de perdón. It's like 1,000 years or 100 years of forgiveness. But effectively, my point here is everyone's been stealing, right? Like if they're stealing from OpenAI, OpenAI was stealing from artists, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, let's call it what it is. It's not that I'm not alarmed by Temu and Shine or whatever, and by DeepSeek, but what we're seeing is not just IP theft. What we're seeing is dumping. And that's a tale as old as time, and that's why we have steel tariffs and like all these other things. They are using their advantage in production, manufacturing, and honestly, even their economic advantage, to effectively kill or devalue local economies by dumping lower priced products. And before, dumping used to be a lower quality product problem. Now it's not even lower quality, just cheaper and more readily available. So here's where you see all of this, like, all these people that have been just so eager to get rid of every bit of regulation on earth. Okay, cool. There's reasons why, like, governments have had hands on the markets, especially when it comes to import, export, etc., in order to protect local economies, and we're not doing that. So we're gonna see some interesting suffering coming from that side of things. Now, does that mean there's no intellectual property theft or that it doesn't matter? No, the whole thing is partially built on intellectual property theft. However, I think it's also really curious what we see with this potential intellectual property theft involved with DeepSeek, which is what we're being told is not that, like, someone hacked into OpenAI and stole their weights. It sounds like, and I'm far from an expert on this, but it sounds like the DeepSeek folks figured out how to use a technique called distilling in order to train it. Basically, distilling means that you use a much more advanced or complex model to train a less advanced model and make it perform at the quality or at a similar quality than the more advanced model. And apparently this is a technique that's been around with all these LLM shops, which they were using, I guess, in order to, like, quantize things, to make certain models smaller, to make, like, one of the biggest issues we have, and it's Apple's, like, the bane of Apple's existence with this Apple Intelligence shit is, okay, LLMs are awesome. They're fucking huge, and you need insane hardware to run them. You want privacy preserving local AI on your phone? It's never going to be able to run that shit. So we need to talk about small language models. So, distilling is a way that you could try to get these smaller language models to perform at the quality of these massive models. Now, the problem here is, it turns out maybe the DeepSeek folks or somebody, what they said was someone affiliated with DeepSeek or in China, apparently ran a boatload of API queries back in August and may have used that to distill and train a model. And I'm wondering if that's even covered in their EULA, but frankly, what we're seeing is cleverness, not theft. Like, that's fucking clever on their part. Somebody was willing to invest some money into running, I don't know, $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 worth of API queries to train another model, and it worked.
And we don't know the
shit.
we don't know the legality of it either, right? Like you mentioned, we don't know if it's covered in EULAs. The U.S. government is raising this distillation issue as kind of like the hub of what the complaint is. Costin?
And apparently this is covered by the OpenAI EULA. Like, you cannot use their model to train your model. Like, it's in the EULA.
Okay, here's a question though. Like, it's a fucking EULA. They can sue DeepSeek. That's not, so, like, intellectual property theft entails criminality. What we're talking about here is someone violating terms of service. And I'm not a lawyer, not the right person to tell you whether that is tantamount to a crime. But to me, it sounds like someone got a little clever with you.
And you're pissed.
And you're pissed. And I'm so sorry about that, but that's life in the NFL.
According to public reports, OpenAI said it has evidence that this DeepSeek used this distillation technique of its GPT models to train the open source V3 and R1 models at a fraction of the cost of what a Western big company would be spending on their own models. So again, like you just described, it just they figured out a way to build a better mousetrap. And then OpenAI and Microsoft, which is ChatGPT's biggest backer, have started investigating whether a group linked to DeepSeek exfiltrated large amounts of data through an API back in autumn. Microsoft, they're investigating.
Exfiltrated large amounts of data is a really interesting phrase.
Hey,
they're not saying they're not saying they hacked them, right? They're not saying that they accessed a database they weren't supposed to. So I don't know. To me, I'm like, either you're getting cute with how you describe people running a bunch of API queries, or they had a really good jailbreak and somehow found some way to have the model just dump out tons of info that it wouldn't otherwise. But, like, if they figured that out, I mean, that sounds like some clever shit. I don't even know if is that even possible. How does that work? But like,
Is there an alternate universe, Costin, where they didn't do any of this and they just like did their own
I-
innovation, wrote their own science paper, and just figured this out on their own? Is that an alternative universe, or do you believe this distillation
I-
issue is definitely checkbox 100%? There's a story there, or this is all just sour grapes?
No, look, I would look at this issue from two angles, perhaps. One of them is that there are some significant innovations that went into this DeepSeek V3 R1, which they make people kind of raise an eyebrow. So, for just to give you an example, was that simply because they're limited in the amount of GPU power they can leverage due to sanctions, due to all sorts of things, at least in principle. Because there are people out there claiming that they have access to the latest NVIDIA cards. By the way, there's like a very important statement here, which you can see it everywhere in the media, and I think the media doesn't fully understand how these things work. So the media says like, "Oh, Chinese startup managed to do the same as OpenAI with just $5 million, while OpenAI spent like $500 billion doing the same thing." So the
Right.
Chinese
Yeah,
did the
that's the
same with
top level
5.
narrative. That's the narrative that's emerged. Yeah.
That's like psyops, if you ask me, because people fail to understand one very important point here, which is what DeepSeek says. They say that for this model, the training cost is $5 million using 2.8 million hours of H800 GPUs. So what they're saying, if you were to use H800 GPUs, it would take 2.8 million hours, which means approximately $5 million. Like if you would, but if on the other hand you have H100s, which are like more powerful, then the cost is obviously much higher and the time is less. So again, it's just a way of saying things in a manner that, in my opinion, it's a kind of psyops. Like, what's the reason here? The reason is to make this look like it's a more powerful model that does a lot more than the top of the line ChatGPT model, but with a fraction of the cost. This is the goal here. And like I'm of course I'm questioning this $5.5 million. It's You can be 100% confident that they didn't spend just $5 million building this. I mean, this company didn't appear yesterday. They've been around for a while. They actually launch models. There are models they launched 1 year ago, so they've been around. They're not just something that appeared out of nowhere. However, this doesn't mean that they didn't bring some significant innovation with their things. So they had to optimize things in order to speed stuff up. So, like one example here, everyone is again talking about is while others they just leverage the NVIDIA CUDA to program stuff, they actually use machine code, like the equivalent of machine code to code the models.
I mean, that was clever as fuck. And that I thought that was super cool that they went at like this underlying sort of
Optimizations.
optimization. And that this is something that I don't think people understand. And I didn't understand until until I worked at Google for a bit, and witnessed it firsthand. But American companies have this form of like affluenza, like this sickness that comes with being a fucking trust fund kid, essentially, which is, yes, you could be scrappy, but why would you be? We have daddy's credit card. Just do it. And like, I'm serious. I'm dead fucking serious. I used to have these conversations with Mike Wiasek at Chronicle. And we were talking about how to do like full corpus scanning for the entirety of VirusTotal, right? Like VT, let's say VT has like 6-7 petabytes worth of stuff. We pay to run retro hunts. The retro hunts are limited, depending on how much you pay, to either 3 months or 12 months worth of data, like just that rolling that window. And despite begging, they've never actually made this available. Like, I would kill for like full corpus scanning on VT. No, I'm not going to convince my company to pay $100,000 per scan, but you should just do it because you have the resources and you should just do it. Now, to the point, I used to like talk to Mike about like all these ways we could like optimize and be efficient. Like, what if we did this? What if we only scanned that? And what Mike taught me was that there was really no reason to do that. If you can map reduce the problem, which is turn it into like a distributed problem, it turns out Google has a bajillion fucking servers that are just sitting around doing nothing unless somebody's contracting them. So as long as you have an orchestrator with an ability to prioritize how tasks are managed, instead of trying to come up with the cleverest way to solve the problem, just throw
resources at it. Yeah.
Throw a million computers at it and just solve it. And that works, and it has gotten us very far in a lot of ways. And that's the advantage that comes. Like, look, every company that is cloud only has been fooled into a failure state of some sort somewhere in the future, because basically what you're saying is I will take the cheap ability to scale now by going onto the cloud in favor of the spare resources I would have had I amortized the cost of building a data center or renting a portion of a data center and having that be mine, having that fucking hardware be ours going forward. Instead, you are subject to whatever the cloud does, and which is why Amazon can give you an amazing rate for 3 years, and on year 4 it goes, oh, you're doing quite well. We just 7x the price. You want to, and none of this is on Kubernetes, so good luck migrating, right?
Look, like that's how capitalism works. Like you pay, it costs you more, but you pay more to other companies who can build better products, and more people will buy them, and so on and so on.
This is how China dumping works as well.
Well, that's it.
Dumping you corner the market, right?
Yeah, no, I mean that's how these things work. People, there's a lot of early decisions that go into companies, which is they act as eventual poison pills. And I am a deep believer that over reliance on the cloud is the ultimate poison pill, of which many companies, many startups will never recover ever.
Let me just add a little side note to what you said, Juan, and I heard it and just in my head, and I don't want to forget it. And this is for the folks working at Google and Microsoft who are just like, daddy's rich. What do you call them? Trust fund kids. I actually had conversations over the last, I would say, 2 weeks with about 3 CISOs who we had a conversation about, talent must be available with all the Google layoffs and all these layoffs. And I mean, senior engineering talent must be around. And surprisingly to me, were these guys saying, I'm not hiring people from Google. They just don't have the scrappy startup mentality. Nope. They don't know how to innovate. They lean on resources and so on. So I'm just talking directly to those folks in those organizations, like, get your mindset right, because you're not always going to live there, and there are other worlds, and you're limiting yourself to thinking and trying to solve problems as well.
Dude, look, I not to get too inside baseball, but like those CISOs are completely right. And we kind of figured out a bit of a formula. So like when Mike and I started Stairwell, we had this amazing recruiter, Tyler King, amazing person too. He's now at Binarly, so congrats to our friends at Binarly. But Tyler, I mean, apart from being one of the kindest individuals I've ever met, he was an amazing recruiter of a Chronicle, and then he came over to Stairwell. He kind of figured out this sweet spot where we were looking for engineers who are really good and cloud native, like for GCP, and ideally like scrappy and smart. And basically, you were either looking at getting let's say, someone who worked at Google, I want to say in the window of 10 to 12 years before, which means they were there when the systems were being built, when a lot of the like real cleverness went into creating these new paradigms of like distributed systems and cloud computing and Borg and what would eventually become Kubernetes and like all that stuff. So they were there to build it. They understood what it was like to get those systems running. Or you settled for somebody who had worked at Google for like 2 to 3 years and 2 years, gotten enough training, had gotten to be like an L3, L4 at most, but no longer than that. because if they were there for longer than that, they got lazy. They got complacent. They didn't understand how the systems actually work. They were just good at using, like putting things together that they hadn't built. And I mean, look, it's not just Google, right? Like you talk to people who come out of NSA now, and like unless they were like ultra hardcore vuln developers or malware developers, usually they won't talk
They're
about it.
push button guys, yeah.
Yeah, usually you get like I've worked with Intel analysts out of NSA who are brilliant analysts, but they never realized just how much they were piggybacking on top of a mega machinery that they didn't understand, a ton of collection that they hadn't had to do themselves. They were just really, really good at like taking all of this amazing information and coalescing that into brilliant insights. Cool. Try, like when you walk out and try to do that yourself, the world looks very different, right? Because you're not standing on the shoulders of giants. I say that now with like all these layoffs and stuff, is like my hope has been that there's enough people who were paid very well, who are very, very smart, who hopefully have some level of financial independence, who have some fire in their belly because they feel that they were mistreated by these companies and would decide to go, like mushrooms, just bring up startups left and right to do cool shit and create more of a cottage industry of cool stuff. We haven't seen that yet. I keep hoping that it'll happen. I don't know. But yeah, I definitely am not looking to those companies to get engineers who are like ready to come to a 6-person startup and like wear 7 hats and stay up late. Like I remember when we were going to launch the product at Chronicle at RSA, and like Mike, like we were a week away from launch, and Mike and I like look up in the office and we realize suddenly that we're completely alone, and it was like 5:30 in the afternoon. Everyone had just gone home. You're like, okay.
Big company blues. Costin, just to kind of get us off of that tangent and back onto this, do you believe there's like real this what do you at its core, what do you think has happened here? Do you think the distillation has happened, or do you think this has been through research forced by a startup that was forced to have to think because they didn't have capex of an OpenAI?
I mean, look, you need to keep in mind what the goal is and what the general philosophy is and the mentality that goes into these things. And if you look at pretty much everything else coming out of China, all these different apps or like different solutions, like Shein, again, they're focused on cost. For them, it's important first to beat everybody else with the cost. Maybe, I mean, they're like losing a lot of money. That's like a very, very high possibility here that with everything, like from maybe selling antimony or any sorts of rare earth minerals or whatever, they're just losing money. Why? Because they want to become the dominant player on the market, and once they reach that position, it's too late for everybody else because they've gone out of business. So if this is a goal here, then everything suddenly I think makes a lot of sense. You're releasing like a very, very good open source model which costed very little, so there was like a very small cost associated with that, because they essentially piggybacked on everything imaginable, from training on other models, from distilling other models, from using cheap cars, from using expensive cars, from using optimizations, pretty much everything, to produce a model that is super good, like even maybe like through a miracle. And again, I've been saying on this podcast, I think a lot of times, that I have a feeling that companies in China are doing more than what is visible to us, even in the sense of threat intelligence. They have more information than what they're showing. So
Do you
I
think they're showing it internally? Do you think there's more threat intel sharing happening among Chinese companies internally in very TLP black?
Yeah, there is for sure. I mean, companies, some of the companies like NT, right, or Pangu Labs or Chihu 360, sharing between them, they do share a lot more than what they're publishing or sharing with non-Chinese companies. Again, there's all sorts of government regulations. Nobody wants to go to jail or to the Chinese equivalent of Siberia, or again,
What is the Chinese
people love
equivalent of Siberia?
their loves. Yeah, Siberia is the Chinese equivalent of Siberia. So I think what is happening here, just to again circle back to our discussion, is that they are doing what they've been doing pretty much in every other sector, releasing a cheap, good model, good enough if you want, that maybe it wasn't built the way they claim, like with just $5 million. Maybe it didn't cost $5 million. Maybe it was 50. I don't know. Maybe they did use that APIs. Maybe they did use train it with other models. But in the end, the model that was available last week, I can tell you was very good. The model that is available this week is kind of crappy. And I'll just give you one example. Like last week, it was super good. Then somewhere in the middle, like the middle of this week, it started timing out. You couldn't use. I wanted to show this to a couple of friends. It was essentially not working. Like timeout, error. I thought it was my VPN. It was not. And then today, I think it started working again, but the answers are like on par with the first version of ChatGPT. And I'll tell you like a funny story here. I don't know if you guys had this in college or high school. Like we did a lot. Teacher gives you a poem, and the question is, what was the intention of the poet? And to me, this was like a devastating question. What was the intention? Or what was in the mind of the poet? And I was like, dude, I have no idea what was in the mind of that guy when he was doing mushrooms or smoking weed or what. Like nobody can say what was in the mind of that poet. It's
On
impossible.
propofol.
It's your interpretation.
So I asked, like we were joking, and I asked exactly this question to this morning. I asked this question to DeepSeek about a famous Romanian poem about crypto. By the way,
What?
like the Romanian poets 50 years ago, they were writing about crypto. You can Google it. Google
Cryptography or
Riga
cryptocurrency?
crypto. Just Google Riga crypto and you'll
I will
find the
ask DeepSeek.
it's actually a poem from a Romanian mathematician who was also doing poems, Riga Crypto. And I asked DeepSeek what was in the mind of the poet. And the answer was, first of all, he said,
What the
oh,
fuck?
yeah, I know this poem. It's from a totally different national poet of Romania, Mihai Eminescu. It's not. And it was like a total crap answer. Like I was so disappointed. And then I asked the same question to ChatGPT, and I was like mind blown. Finally, after like all these years, after 30 years,
All your life.
somebody finally was able to say what was in the mind of that poet, and the way it analyzed it. Oh, he was a mathematician, he was into geometry, he was into algebra. Combine that, so I think that philosophically this is what he meant, and metaphorically this is how he constructed the language. And if we draw parallel with mythology, it's like Narcissus and Oedipus, and these are kind of similar mythological influence. And I was like, holy crap, finally, like this AI understands the question, what was in the mind of the poet. And DeepSeek was shit, trust me. Like he didn't even know who wrote that poem.
It's important to clarify like which model you're using for each one and what settings are on. And I'm saying that because like this is to the point of what I was saying earlier, where like a lot of shit is happening behind the scenes without you notice. So for example, like if I was doing this on ChatGPT, right, and I wanted to
Yeah.
ask it the same question that you're asking, like I know that I don't know if 4.0 or O1 or O1 Pro would even know would have access to that poem. Like it would
It
know about
does.
the poem. But
It does.
let's say that maybe it doesn't, right? Like that's when I would go 4.0 and turn on search, and then it would go on the internet, it would find the exact poem, pull it out. The problem then is when I turn on search, the temperature goes down. So it's not going to do anything creative, it's just going to search for the thing. The reason I'm asking that is ChatGPT does not allow O1 or O1 Pro to do search. It doesn't allow it to pull anything from the internet. I'm guessing because they're evaluating what the model can do on its own without adding that complexity of external information. But R1 lets you search for the internet with the R1 model. And I'm curious if that also means they turn the temperature down and it becomes much shittier, or if not, right? Like there's all those little thingies.
Sure.
And you know, frankly, the biggest constraint on any interaction any of us have ever had with any of these models on a front end is actually the system prompt. And like that's a really important concept that, you know, got discussed early on when Microsoft kicked off that whole, like, I think Sydney thing, and it was like an emo angry teenager, and people were like, what the fuck, like this is an OpenAI model, why is yours like acting up, right? Like why does yours have issues? And frankly, like that's where you see things like what the system prompt is. The system prompt is like setting the constraints, like all the things where you're like, hey, you know, don't answer questions about like building bombs, don't do this, that, and the other. All of that stuff has to be spelled out in the system prompt. The system prompt is not being shown to the user on the front end. And they will tweak that shit at random. And sometimes you start getting shittier results and you don't know why, but it's like you're fighting against the system prompt. Keep in mind, over the API, that's not an issue. So like that's why I'm really curious if we ever get information about how it was that these Chinese folks who were exfiltrating data, massive amounts of data via the API, but not hacking, apparently, I'm really curious what clever shit they came up with to get these models to just spew stuff in a way that they could distill from.
One of the things in the reporting is that Microsoft security researchers claim they observed individuals they believe may be linked to DeepSeek, exfiltrating this large amount of data, and they notified OpenAI. Do you think this is just, again, Satya sending guys to clutch at straws to protect his big, massive, I'm good for 80 billion investment? Or do you think there's real shenanigans at play?
No. I'm sure there are shenanigans at play. I'm sure. But like, also, like, what the fuck were you guys doing? Like, how many? I don't understand the volume of API queries that OpenAI is receiving. They have a trust and safety team. They have cybersecurity folks. Like, we know some of them. They're wonderful people. But like, is anyone evaluating the data that's running through this, like these API queries? Like, I can exfiltrate what volume of stuff through API queries? Like, as long as I'm willing to pay you, like, you don't care? Because if that's the case,
this is the big company paradox, right? Like, we don't care. We have
Microsoft is the one figuring out, which means they were like, I don't know how the data is working between Microsoft OpenAI. I imagine there's still some boundary. OpenAI is running their stuff on Microsoft's infrastructure, which means like, I'm gonna guess like maybe even Mystic were the people who are like looking at what's happening in this infrastructure, or
they're going like, what the hell? Yeah.
Well, maybe they can't even see what the data is for all we know, but they're looking at volume. You go, hey, the average API query response is this much, and yet look at this cluster of activity around these like 3 or 4 IPs or 2 or 3 accounts or whatever the fuck in August that were just like getting a massive volume of stuff in and out. Like, it's kind of basic TI.
Do you guys have any queasiness? Do you have any queasiness around Microsoft tracking OpenAI usage down to individuals? And I'll bring this up because Google and Gemini also said they're watching North Koreans and Iranians and Russians and how all these APTs are using their AI model to, create phishing emails or do scripting or whatever. And I'm wondering if this is just a state of normalcy where these companies are basically tracking right down to individual level. Costin, you have a concern there at all?
I mean, look, you know what's missing from our discussion now? Conspiracy Ryan. So
yeah, where the fuck is Conspiracy Ryan?
If I was the Conspiracy Ryan thinking about why is DeepSeek suddenly not so good anymore. Like, yeah, you could say maybe they just downgraded the model so they can serve the plus 80 million users per day there again. It could be, that's one possibility. But the other possibility that Conspiracy Ryan could bring up is if you work like in the red team of OpenAI or Microsoft or whoever, what do you do when DeepSeek drops? You put all your best guys, try to jailbreak the shit out of DeepSeek to understand how it works and how it was built and what kind of data went into it. How much of that data is actually our data? So what do you do if you're DeepSeek? You take that model offline and you replace it with the shittier, but let's say copyright safe model, one that doesn't have the knowledge of all Romanian poetry and what the poet wanted to say or to sing, but one which is decent. Like you can try to hack the shit out of this model, but you won't find anything. So maybe that's one thing that is happening here, or maybe it's the other one. That would maybe the opinion of conspiracy right.
I started off this conversation by saying there were two issues at play: the privacy and the worries about data being sent off to China, the IP theft and the national security concerns. We've seen the US Navy ban the use of it. I'm hearing from CISOs that they're banning the use of the cloud version in their organizations because people just naturally upload PDFs and company documents to simplify this. Hey, write a summary, write a one-page summary of this big 10-page thing. And they're just like worried about that. But there's a third angle that's possible as well, is that this is open source and probably being integrated into products all over the world. Can you guys dig in a little bit there in terms of what are some of the concerns or risks there?
How the fuck are these different concerns or risks than the ones that you had with OpenAI before? Like they're just not. And I think these moments are important because they reveal the convenient little lies we tell ourselves to get comfortable with things. We talked about this on like episode 3 or 4 or something like that, where I said, look, there's an element of uncanniness that comes with having a conversation with these AI agents, and the idea that it's meant to replace search.
Right. I remember you were talking to your therapist about your
Dude, like think about it. Like I just, this is all I'm gonna tell you guys to do. Go look at the last time you did a medical search in Google, and you were like, "What is the deal with you know? Do I have cancer?" Yeah, exactly. Do I have cancer because this, like, I have a skin tag on my arm or whatever? Go ask that same question of ChatGPT, and just see how you feel. Because I'm not talking about a scientific or technological difference. I am talking about
there's a visceral
response, the same way that, like, if you were just chatting with a friend of yours being like, hey, do I have cancer because I have this weird, like, you know, like there's an oddness to it, which is, you know, it's a corollary of the Turing test. If I can't really tell that this thing is not a human being, some part of me emotionally is tussling with the same experience as, like, going to your doctor and admitting that you did some dumb shit, right? Like it's a weird feeling. And I bring that up because there's going to be a lot of this weirdness, and there has been, and there should be, when using an internet service that feels a little more personal, and somehow we start to have conversations about things that we should have had when it came to Google Docs, when it came to Google Search, when it came to G Drive, when it came to all these other things, that we came up with convenient little comfortable approximations so as not to have those conversations, right? Like every CISO who complains about, like, uploading a PDF to whatever, like, where do those PDFs live? They live on Google Drive anyways. If tomorrow you found out that all of Gemini was trained on every PDF that anybody ever put on Google Drive, like, okay, right? Like there's a bunch, basically what we're saying is it is all boiling back down to trust. And I'm not saying you should trust the Chinese. I'm saying that you are surprisingly trusting of American companies that are showing you they don't give a flying fuck about you, your intellectual property, the future of humanity, your ability to earn a salary or, like, pay a living wage or have any kind of control or in any way feel entitled or, you know, capable of controlling your universe. But we're gonna bitch about the Chinese. The one thing I'm excited about here, Ryan, just the one thing I'm excited about here is this is going to start dispelling a lot of this idiot savant bullshit of AGI, of like, oh, the most important thing here is that we're making God. And you're like, yeah, no, bro, you're making a product, and we need to figure out how we're going to use it.
But it's going into an old Romanian poet's mind. I mean, this is godlike.
Sure, but that is not where the societal impact comes. It's not from you building the church of OpenAI. Like, the problem here is you fucking with people's jobs, the economy, intellectual property, and what it means to be a human being going forward. And like, it has jack shit to do with the church to your mechanical god.
When I said integration, I was bringing up a point that my buddy Sid Trivedi raised on LinkedIn, which is let's look a few steps ahead. And DeepSeek models are between 1/10 or a fourth of the cost of what startups are using to build AI agents and put their wrappers around. What happens when a bunch of cybersecurity startups all over the place start using DeepSeek technology to put their wrapper around, and we get down the road of another Huawei, another TikTok, it's too late before we can determine what are the risks of this thing being integrated throughout our lives? Is there like Costin, when you brought up this integration thing, what were you touching on?
How do you mean, like, when I brought up the integration? What do you mean by that?
You mentioned earlier that there's a third angle here, this open source, and when it starts getting integrated everywhere.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking, I was thinking, like, sometimes when you see these kind of things and you realize, this is something that I would have done myself, and this is something that I have done myself in the past when I wanted to mess with people's minds or to make it more difficult for other people to do things back to you. Like, when you're talking about like things such as opposition or resilience, for instance. So it's in a philosophical, let's say, way of thinking. The moment that other people start adopting your code, you essentially have like a foot in their garden, and this is like let's say the mirage here is that, oh yeah, the Chinese are going to steal your data, so why don't you download this 671 billion parameters model and run it locally on your own GPUs, and you can actually run that model on 4 high-end GPUs from NVIDIA, maybe like a $12,000 rig setup, something like that. And people, I think that this is the whole mirage of the whole idea, is that you can, but then they do have a kind of a foot in your garden. And what happens here is that as you say, like, wow, this model is formidable, it's almost free, like I can query it 1,000,000 times per day, zero costs, I don't have to finance the capitalism.
You build your business around it.
I can build my business, like I'll do. And this is what I was doing. I tell you that for the past week I was taking like the different models, not the 671 billion, but like the smaller ones, 30 billion, 7 billion, these distilled models, running them locally and doing the same IOC extraction and parsing through them just to see how good they are. And the thing is that you integrate everything with that model, right? You integrate it locally, you do all that stuff. And then I was thinking, like, hey, by the way, is there any chance that in the future somebody publishes a model that somehow manages to like buffer overflow your rig or like exploit you, or it contains malware? It uses like PCI bus to rewrite memory and to inject itself in the kernel and take over your system.
Conspiracy Costin
like a
has
supply
arrived.
chain attack.
Costin,
No,
yeah.
it's not. It's paranoid, or like realistic Costin, if you want. And this is like what I realized, that there's almost like no audit of these
That's
models.
the
Like
point.
nobody's doing the
That's the
source
point,
code
Siv.
auditing.
But that has to do with how you build this shit. Like,
Well, what do you do? Like, you go to these websites, you download the model and run it locally. That's it. Like, and
but
there's
it's
no
not.
antivirus or code analysis tool that will tell
Look,
you
man,
what's in the
there's no system to
700
provide
billion
guidance.
files.
You're describing the issue with any reliance on an API.
Yeah, not API, but running code locally.
You're thinking
on
about
your
like
machine.
so you're saying the local. I don't know. Like, I really don't know. And frankly, there's an area of this that like I think about a lot, but I don't know what to do with, which is like we've heard forever about like GPU resident malware. And I am sure if it wasn't like it has been around. I've heard that it's been around for a long time. I've never seen it. I've never found it. But now is a wonderful time to debate. For example,
Now
I'll
it's
give
a
you one.
time.
I'll give you one interesting corollary of something Costin said earlier, right? Like they told us what it would take to train this thing at a certain cost, at a certain type of hardware. They didn't necessarily tell us what hardware they used. And
Exactly.
like, and I'll go a step further. How many American companies are renting GPUs like for cloud use without verifying who they're selling that to? And I say that because, fine, we've sanctioned them, their ability to get these, pieces of hardware. Maybe they don't even fucking want them if they can go pay DigitalOcean or whatever other company, I don't know what the right name. I shouldn't say that one because frankly, it's whatever companies are renting GPUs, and say, hey, I'm gonna, pay you the 50 grand a month or the 500,000 a month and like use your A1000s for, for a month's worth of workload, and then I'm out. And I say that in relation to the GPU thing because the fact that people are renting out GPUs to like perfect strangers is really interesting considering how little of an analysis there is of like the firmware and residency of what happens in GPUs, of what the threat landscape actually is there, and what is being left behind, what is being used. And like that brings us back to like look at the level of expertise that these DeepSeek folks have exhibited in optimizing the underlying code for these things. So if you're already living at that level with how you use these GPUs, I think there's a different level of understanding that what is being exhibited throughout the industry as far as what this threat landscape actually entails.
I got one more small DeepSeek story before my head truly explodes. We are an hour and 15 minutes, we're still on this
The
topic.
DeepSeek
Is
episode,
uh,
3-hour episode.
a research paper from Wiz. Wiz is this Israeli cybersecurity cloud data security company that basically in the first week identified a publicly accessible ClickHouse database belonging to DeepSeek, allowed full control over database operations, including the ability to access internal data. And they mention in millions of lines of log streams, chat history, secret keys, backend details, other sensitive information, completely open, unauthenticated, exposing this sensitive data. Did you guys get a look at this? And is there any? They did mention a line. It's one of the topics on this podcast, a throwaway line that we did not execute intrusive queries beyond enumeration to preserve ethical research practices. Like, it's
Yeah.
like the business intelligence tools versus implant. Costin, you got to look at this.
Look,
Big deal or a nothing burger?
if what I was saying is, if Wiz is doing this to DeepSeek, who is saying that DeepSeek is not doing this to OpenAI and everybody out there? I mean, yeah, respect for the constraint if you want, for not doing more. What I was also thinking here is that how ethical or how legal that is to try to kind of pen test an AI or LLM running online without informing the owners, like how ethical or legal that is. I don't know if people have it in the EULA, like that you cannot try to jailbreak us or to hack us or to get access,
I
any
think
attempts to get
some companies
access and
Scout's
so.
honor.
they provide
Hmm.
safe harbor if you're in a bug bounty program. If you have like a
Okay.
HackerOne bug bounty program, they
Uh-huh.
provide safe harbor for certain
Uh-huh.
things, and I think certain things are out of bounds. But in this case, like I mean, they published this without even like communicating with the DeepSeek folks. I think they were
Well,
saying they sent it to
no,
every
no,
email address
they
that they
let
could
them
find on
know.
LinkedIn.
They let them know. But like, look, let's not make this any more nefarious than what it is, right? They're saying we found a thing that was exposed to the internet. We probed it very lightly just to see what kind of information it had. We
And
didn't check.
OMG,
No,
boom,
we didn't
here's
check what the information was. Like that's what they mean by those queries. And frankly, this is like boilerplate red team stuff because you get people who get all hopped up on like you fucking hacked us. Like how dare you probe our infrastructure? We're like, bro, we're just letting you know that you fucking left it exposed on the internet, right? Like so let's not make it any more nefarious than it needs to be. But I think the deeper it's funny, right? Like what they're showing us is like, look, these dudes haven't even secured where most of this like account info and chats and stuff are going until like somebody else let them know. The better question, I think that what Kosin, or I guess you brought up. Sorry, I'm losing track here, but like the this idea of like, did DeepSeek do this to OpenAI? Like, I'm not saying OpenAI got hacked at all. I think I'm even surprised that they're being as forward about what may have happened of like, hey, these dudes did this thing. Because like it's kind of funny, right? Like you just kind of look stupid. I hate to say it, like I'm a huge OpenAI stan. I love OpenAI. I like their shit better than anybody else's. Like they can endorse me all they want, but like I'll wear an OpenAI jacket. But
No, you're not.
essentially,
Not on
like
this show.
yeah, no, I'm in it. Sponsor the show. Anyways, but like I, I'm a huge stan, but like this isn't a good look. And the only thing that would be a worse look would be for them to say, "Oh, they hacked us and stole our intellectual property." Cuz then like if you thought the market for AI tanked because somebody said, "Oh, this is a nice model you got here, China." Imagine what happens when people start to get this inflated sense that everything OpenAI knows is now in Chinese hands. And that's a very simplistic mentality, but it is usually how institutional investors tend to think about this stuff, right? Like, oh yeah, you have a great, F-22, like you're the only person that knows how to make that thing. Oh, the Chinese hacked us. Oh shit, you have no value whatsoever anymore. Now the Chinese like have the all the know-how to do this. That's not the case here. From an infrastructure standpoint, it's not the case. From a market penetration standpoint, it's not the case. And from a trust standpoint, it's not the case. I can tell you, look, it's the corollaries to the cloud are manifold and important. Alibaba Cloud is huge. It is cheaper. It is equally available. And yet, Azure and Amazon are never going to lose a great portion of their business to Alibaba Cloud because no one's going to put their shit on a Chinese server.
You're going to
Right?
voluntarily send it though when all your employees are uploading your PDFs and your sales document and your Excel files. Like you're voluntarily contributing it though.
I'm just
I mean, that's
like,
the raw reality of what's happening with a lot of these chat apps. Like this DeepSeek
Yeah.
thing is embedded in throughout organizations. People just mind-numbingly upload documents into it. I mean, like how many companies you think are like scrambling now to put controls in place and DLP controls in place around blocking this anything going out to DeepSeek? It's a real issue. I want to
well,
just
how much
close
do you
on it.
want to block it? Like, how much of this is actually you lowering the efficiency of your workforce? And I say that not with DeepSeek. Again, I am not shilling for DeepSeek. I just think it's forcing us to have a conversation we needed to have anyways about like where you send your data and who you trust with what. Like, frankly, I have yet to see any of the American AI companies act like they have any kind of scruples about anything. So, look, it's just we
Yeah.
don't like the Chinese. Okay, cool. But like, I don't see Anthropic or OpenAI being particularly ethical in anything that they do. Um, the bigger issue here is an economics problem. And frankly, it's like I said, I think this is where we start to see, I hope, the delusions of the conversation in the valley about AI starting to show their cracks as like dumb fantasies. And like I'm glad we can stop having I hope we can stop having the dumb fantasies conversation about AI. About like what happens when like we hit AGI and the skies open and Jesus comes down and crowns the Twink Lord as like the savior of humanity. And then none of us have jobs or money anymore, and everyone's thrilled to just hang out with chatbots until we all die. Right?
That's how
Like,
you raise VC money, though. And when you want to raise $50 billion, you have to
and
promise that
look,
you're creating
and the
God.
VCs, it's the VCs' fault too. They have built that cult of personality bullshit around some genius whatever. And like it doesn't matter what the product is, it doesn't matter what the impact is, it doesn't matter the legality of it. All that matters is, oh, this person's a genius, so we're just going to shove money into their pockets. I think that shit gets very real very quick the minute this becomes an actual arms race with a well-resourced other nation that has like extensively deep pockets, that has an interest in stealing the primacy of this market from us, and will settle for being the third place option for
That
the
has the
rest of the
talent.
planet.
that has the talent and the kind of expertise and skill that they're showcasing here as well.
It's
They're
what we
showcasing
saw
around
with the
this.
cloud, and it's what we're going to see with AI. So the question now, the reason I say the delusions can drop is once we stop having this bullshit conversation that like nobody but us can do this, that we have a nobus business in AI, then we can start having realistic conversations about AI safety. Then we can start have realistic conversations about like what DLP control should be happening with AI and where in your product you want to integrate it and what does it do to your intellectual property when you use shit from this service and from the other. Those are real conversations we need to be having.
Costin, put a bow on it for me quickly. Where does this all end? Do you think this gets dumped into the tariff conversation? How does the Trump administration respond? Obviously, the distillation word was thrown out by David Sachs, who is the new White House in crypto and AI czar. Where do you see this ending? Is there a world that this gets caught up in the ban DeepSeek narrative?
Well, I think, as I was saying before, the metaphor of slow boiling the frog maybe is not the most appropriate for these things because we are talking about hundreds of billions being put into AI from the US side of things, right? Trump announced Project Stargate, $500 billion going to Sam Altman, Larry Ellison, Oracle, so on and so on.
Satya said he's good for 80 billion of it. So
He's good for
Oracle
80
has
billion.
AI.
And like, yeah, when we are talking this kind of money and then suddenly like somebody shows up and they ruin all your plans and the stocks collapse, Nvidia goes down 16%, then like it's not fun anymore. Like this is no longer slow, this is like frying the frog, like fast frying the frog in like deep
Frying the frog.
deep
What's the
frying the
response?
frog in oil, if you want. And I think that with the Trump administration, everything will be about tariffs, about sanctions. So I don't think it's out of the question that Trump will put some maybe tariffs, or not only that, but he can simply say that if you integrate with DeepSeek, then you will be in trouble. Or if you deploy, I don't know, the source code, anything that comes from them, you can no longer work with the government. Like if you have DeepSeek in your network, you can say bye-bye to any kind of government contract. And we know they've done that in the past with Kaspersky, right? Like, so they
They
can
just
do
did it with Colombia, basically, which is just like, hey, I'm going to throw out some threats and warnings about like some significant tariffs and things that I'm going to implement if you don't get in line. I mean, this is like become the norm.
I
But
think,
guys,
yeah,
like,
this is
what is
shaking the kind of the foundation of capitalism, if you want. And the things are too big. Things are too big to let them go ahead like randomly as a ship sailing with
This,
the wind.
Mr. America, you're gonna push back here because they destroyed democracy out there in Romania, and they're trying to pin this capitalism destruction on us. Where does this end?
They
Where does
just
this
stole
end?
like the national Romanian thesaurus, or like the thesaurus. How do you call it in English?
thesaurus? Yes.
Thesaurus.
Thesaurus was stolen with dynamite. So like they dynamited the wall and stole like a magic helmet that supposedly gave like psychic powers to whoever is wearing it, and three
The
magic
propofol is
bracelets.
still working.
Juanito,
Three
how does this
golden.
all end?
They were made out of monoatomic gold, like which only
What
exists
are
in
we
Romania.
talking about? What are we talking about here?
Close the loop
The
quickly. How does this
propofol is
end?
really kicking in. I'm jealous. No, guys, like, what
I'll
I
move
want to
on.
know. No. What I want to know is what is it that we envision that we can do? You can't tariff a product that's being given away for free. And I just look, guys, like, and even if you could, this is where we get into the like bullshit realm of law when it comes to the internet. Like, this is why I always thought it was horseshit when we talked about banning Kaspersky or TikTok or anybody else, because frankly, what does that mean? You're going to block the servers? You're going to not allow people to pay money to these companies? Well, what happens to the freemium economy, right? Like, they're not paying them shit. So my question here is, if China were to decide that DeepSeek is a nonprofit that the Chinese are going to offer the rest of humanity for free because they're just so nice. They're just so nice. What are you going to do? But look, the US is a powerful country and the government is a wonderful thing and we can do all kinds of wonderful shit. But like this idea that we're somehow like masters of the universe, we can't even be masters of the internet in the US.
Fair
So
enough.
what the fuck do you
You
think you're
need
gonna
to
do?
you need to learn from Romania. Like everything you need to know in life, it comes from Romania. Like me, for instance, in Romania, I cannot access RT.com, which is Russia Today, because it's like forbidden. So Russia
It's good
Today
for
and
you.
like
This is good for you.
yes, but can you access it in the US? Probably you can. Like I don't
Yes.
think it's forbidden. I think it's fine.
Well, 10
So
VPNs, bro.
you can do the same. Like Trump can do the same. They can block, remove DeepSeek from the App Store. First step.
Remove
Like,
it
it's
from
gone.
GitHub. Microsoft can remove it from GitHub and
Microsoft
call
can
it a
remove from
national security
GitHub. They
concern.
can
Yeah.
force like all these different companies like who
Apps.
produce.
That would be
uh,
that would be worse. I'm gonna give you guys a different narrative here. Like I said, the Chinese and all of their, wonderful altruism decide to make DeepSeek API free. Free to everyone. The US blocks DeepSeek. Okay. You remember how the Europeans were going to have no AI, no real development because of the ridiculous and the laws and the enforcement and the intellectual property issues and you need to register a company in Germany and pay 50 grand before you can even work on a fucking model? Okay, well, now all of Europe, South America, Latin America, Africa have free access to a chain of thought model to develop whatever the fuck they want on the internet, and the only people who don't have access to it are in the US. Cool. Let's see what that looks like, right? Like that's where you see the true problematic scenario here. We have been sold this bullshit idea that we were going to be the only humans with fire because the Twink Lord brought it to us he stole it from the gods and he brought it to Americans, and thank God. But like now what we're seeing is there's fire everywhere.
Yeah.
And this shit is not like, we need to change our thinking around what it means to put AI in everything and to rely on it everywhere. And it's not necessarily going to be owned or supported by American companies.
I think if there are folks in the audience who listened to the Gabe Bernadette Shapiro episode when Costin was on vacation, and I made the point that Facebook and Yama and the open source model was the
Llama.
only way to claim leadership here. It was kind of poo-pooed, and here we are with an open source alternative that Juan is suggesting we can't do anything about. So here we are. I'm gonna move on. We got news out of Google Threat Intelligence Group. Apparently, it's now called GTIG. This might be what Mandy and Virus Total tag everything into one.
The reorgs will continue until morale improves.
They put out a report on Poison Plug, Shadowpad, Scatterbrain. I bring it up because, Costin, I think it was 2 or 3 episodes ago, you casually mentioned Shadowpad and this Poison Plug Shadow. Yeah, this Poison Plug thing. Google released a report on this Poison Plug.shadow, and they released a deobfuscator for a custom obfuscating compiler that they found, this Scatterbrain thing. Can you summarize what we know here?
I looked a bit at the samples. Unfortunately, not all the samples are on VirusTotal, so here's a request again. If there's a chance to upload all the samples to VirusTotal, that would be
John Lambert, if you're still
awesome.
listening.
John Lambert.
Google. Who's our
the Google John
GTIG
Lambert
guy? Yeah.
Google John Lambert.
That would be
Sandra.
awesome. Thank you very much. But yeah,
Sandra, if you're out there.
There's a dropper, like there's a dropper there called something like the economical plan of China and Eurasia, or of Europe and Eurasia, which drops, I think, one of these things, which gets sideloaded. So I looked a bit into that. It's of course one of the most interesting evolutions of malware that has been created like a decade ago. Poison Ivy, then we're talking about plugx. So what is called the poison plug is essentially like an improved version that merges source code from both, and shadowpad is kind of the next generation of that, an improved version on top of poison ivy and plugx together.
Did you name
Well,
Shadowpad? Can you
I
remind the
did.
folks what
Yeah,
Shadowpad? You
yeah, I
named
did.
Shadowpad, right?
I did. Correct. To be honest, back then we haven't been able to attribute this to any known actor, but later we found connections, I think, with APT41, same as Google here, because yeah, some of the Shadowpod plugins were almost identical to one of these poison plugs that were being used by
And
APT41.
what
This
Google
was
is
shadow
saying is
hammer
that
stuff,
this
right?
That
Google is
was
saying this
oper-
specific poison plug shadow appears to be restricted to a very specific cluster within APT41, although
correct.
we've seen sharing of tools with other groups.
Well, yeah, because like historically, people were saying that APT41 and there's like two groups, maybe there are three groups now in there. What has been historically been called WinT or WinNTI, which was the group that went after gaming companies and people developing games
Kurt
and so
Baumgartner
on.
does a lot of amazing work on this stuff.
He does a lot of amazing work on everything, by the way. But he did, of course, also look into this. And I think there was Dmitry Tarakanov back in the days. And I remember some stories with people who are calling the company and they said, we want to talk to Dmitry. Like, he's the only guy, like, we are going to talk to him because he's the expert on this. He's like the world expert on that malware. I'm talking about WinNT and some of the blogs that he wrote back in the days when he tracked some of the members of that subgroup. Yeah, then of course, Mendy came and said APT41 is a combination of that and another group which goes after intelligence targets, what Microsoft was calling barium and lead. Um which again was kind of tricky because Microsoft had a lot of information on barium, but almost no information on that. So people are like, okay, we can say what looks like barium, but what looks like lead, nobody knows.
Yeah.
So I was happy when Mendian came with the APT41 paper, and I said, like, thanks God, I put everything under one umbrella, no more barium lead nonsense. Like, it's just one
It's
thingy
now a
under one
blizzard.
umbrella. And now I don't know what it is. Like, honestly, it must be something. I don't know if it's
Well,
two blizzards. Is like a piece of a blizzard with a bit of rain and icing on top. I don't know.
you
Juanito,
have the
why is this new output from Google significant? This deobfuscator library that they've shipped. What is the
well.
significance of it?
So two things here, right? Like there's all the madness around like APT41 and like the Chinese APT ecosystem in itself is quite messy and hard to keep track of. Before we even got into all the Typhoon stuff, but also like Shadowpad, I'm remembering I had to pull this up. So Yi Zhen, see it, and Joey Chen, who used to work at Sentinel One and Sentinel Labs back in 2021, also like put out this big report about Shadowpad and like a Shadowpad builder and some of the stuff there, just to kind of corroborate, like much like we suspected about plugx back in the day, it seems to be like a tool being maintained and sold within the Chinese ecosystem to multiple APT groups. So think of it as like there is some contractor, some umbrella within the Chinese APT ecosystem that is selling and providing Shadowpad itself. Where you get into the interesting things with the scatterbrain bit, actually shout out to Alexander Milankovsky, who and his newborn, who have been, despite being on paternity leave, is still doing some reversing just for the fun of it. Who had been working on this obfuscator for a while and was telling me that this was some like hardcore shit. Like this is pretty hard to RE. So shout out to the Mandiant folks for releasing some of the tooling and explaining some of this work. Like
Shout out to the Flare team as well that apparently
right,
contributed
right.
here. Those guys are big time.
Yeah. So I mean, it's cool. It's cool more for the development of it, and also just to see like how much of this is still, that kind of tooling is still being like having effort put into it. But
And I
I don't know if
found
they need it.
I found the name. So it's Brass Typhoon for barium and APT41. and it is Leopard Typhoon for LED and WinNTI Group. So there you go. You asked, and you were rewarded.
Leopard and brass.
This man,
Yeah,
look
Leopard
at
and
Costin out here
brass.
fact checking in real time.
Fact checking, of course. Yes.
Favorite,
And by the way,
What the fuck is plug?
about-
Why would they do a name again? I'm sorry, like with the naming convention, like what is it? Plug.
Why are you
shadow,
setting him
plug,
off?
Like plug dot shadow. Why? Like why?
yeah, that I
Why
don't
are
know.
they changing the format of their fucking names? Like
I don't
who's
know.
playing with us over there?
What's going on?
Yeah.
By the way, with the obfuscator, I was thinking like, so. But by the way, for many years, like at least going back 20 years ago, 20 something years ago, there was a Chinese virus that was essentially like the pinnacle of polymorphism. There was the Zhengxi virus, or some people called it Chenji virus. It was about 7 kilobytes, but it was like the most sophisticated polymorphic virus to have been ever created. And it was like essentially kind of a rite of passage for any analyst to create detection for that thingy. Like me, I wrote a paper about that, and people like at the company back in the days at RAV spent months trying to write detection for Zhengxi that would be efficient. Like anyone can write detection, but if you spend a second per file to catch it, it's too much. And then for many years, like you didn't see this kind of creativity, or it's not even creativity, it's like sociopathism or something like that, being transposed into malware, if you want. And you wouldn't see that, like and I was like, where are those guys? Like, what are they doing with their life? Where is the polymorphism in Chinese APT
They never
malware?
disappeared, right?
I think they didn't. By the way, there's a bunch of these former 29A like famous malware writers. Some of them from Spain, from all over Europe. I think some were from Latin America, from Russia.
29A.
29A.
Like mini Duke reprisal. Cast.
Correct. So they were like essentially obsessed with encryption, polymorphism, and all these techniques. And I was like, man, if these guys join some kind of an APT group, it's the end. It's like a total disaster. And it's interesting to see this kind of techniques being employed in APT level malware. I can't say I'm happy about it. But the good news, at least this was the good news for me, that from a detection point of view, it's not that hard to detect it. Yeah, de-obfuscating, like doing the reverse engineering, that's hard. But the detection is not that hard, so I was happy.
I think that's something that people kind of forget about like APT malware. Like, it's not that polymorphism went away. It's that it was incredibly loud and essentially stuck out like a sore thumb when it came to, look, AVs don't have to detect what the malware is necessarily. They just have to block malware. And that's why like malware classification is a problem that doesn't get tackled by a lot of modern solutions. You get threat, no threat, good or bad, 80% bad, 90% bad. What is it? I don't know. Let me get a human analyst on it, right? And that's to say that like you're doing your job as long as you're keeping this thing from running or being able to remediate what's going on there, and you recognize that it was a threat. A lot of red teamers and a lot of like people who have not looked at malware operations in the wild, the kind of people who say a nation state would never do X, right? Like they would never be so dumb as to make a mistake. They would never be so dumb as to do this and that. They would, an APT, a nation state would never leave their names and strings inside of the malware, like shit like that. Those same people are still of the idea that like high-end polymorphism, packing, like super intricate obfuscation, that these things are actually desirable and employed in APT malware. And they forget that APTs they don't want to be the cleverest people in the room necessarily. They want to be there quietly, never seen, and leave without anybody noticing. And you don't do that by being the weirdest file in a computer. right? You don't do that by needing RWX permissions in memory to like rewrite and modify yourself over and over. Those are all telltale signs that like shit's not going well, that this is not good. And it's why you don't see it's why you don't see some of the most advanced quote unquote techniques in like anti-analysis being used by APT malware necessarily, because they don't want to. They would rather have a really simple piece of malware, but it just lives there, it does what it needs to do, and it gets the fuck out and nobody ever noticed, than have the cleverest piece of malware that gets detected the second it lands on disk.
The last time we spoke, we were all sitting here pondering the future of CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. I will have you guys know that just yesterday, CISA published a report that's making a bunch of headlines with the claim that there's a dangerous backdoor in these Contec patient monitors. It's like a health monitoring device, Contec CMS 8000, a patient monitor used by healthcare and public health sector. CISA issued an advisory saying they discovered an embedded backdoor function with a hard-coded IP address. The inclusion of this backdoor in the firmware of the monitor can create conditions for remote code execution, device modification, and a warning that this Contec CMS 8000 may be relabeled and sold by resellers. Shout out! Are we shouting out CISA for finding a backdoor here, Costin?
I don't know. Conspiracy Ryan is like throwing a small bone to conspiracy Costin, right? But
this is the language.
Let
in
me
the
ask you,
CISA.
like, first question is like, I looked at the report and the first question was, where's the IOX? I'm a hospital. I mean, I have maybe some of these things, I don't know, because I'm buying them in bulk. Some of them are off eBay. Like, we don't have a big budget, so we buy whatever is available. How do I know if I have some of these things in my network communicating with whatever? Where's the IOX?
Well,
There's
there was
no
an
IOX.
IP address that but they obfuscated.
There's an IP address screenshot in the paper, but it's blacked out. Why? Like, what's going on? Like, am I going to steal the IP address? Like, what is the worry here? And I was like, man, this isn't, something is rotten here. So I made a small Yara rule, and I was able to find the binary, the firmware. I extracted the IP address. I put it on Twitter. So if you want to find, if you are infected with this dangerous backdoor, you can check my Twitter X account, and there's the IP address in there. But
you can read it off on the
one
show
thing
here.
happens if you Google that IP address, you find like 1,000 manuals for these devices in which the IP is like right there in the manual, as being part of they call it like a Vista CMS, like kind of a management system for this device. So I mean, I think there's something going on here, but I can't like put the finger on it. If you want, for sure it's a risk if you want, but the risk is more in line with, like, let me give you another hypothetical situation. You have a router, and your router connects to an IP address to download an update, a firmware update. Does it mean that it has a backdoor? Is that a backdoor if the IP is in China?
Only if the IP is in China.
Well, if the IP is in China, it's a backdoor. Okay. Let's say the IP is in Romania, but the communication protocol is insecure. Is that a backdoor?
Well, so what is the functionality for what happens with this IP, right? Like, and I was looking at some of the code here, like they've got some like Ghidra screenshots on it, and it's like it seems to be copying files to optbin, and then like it starts start monitor, and then the reason I ask is like, fine, it connects to an IP, okay.
It gets a configuration file.
It gets a configuration
all
file.
Publicly documented in the manual.
It's documented in the fucking manual. I mean, what you can tell me is like there should be more auth around it. There should be protections around it. What can the configurations do that like would somehow alter the behavior of this device in a way that's more nefarious than, say, remote management, because they need to fix it because people in hospitals are not good with tech, right? Like, what
so
are
you
we
wouldn't
talking
call this
about?
a backdoor?
I'm asking because, I feel like the threshold for a government organization to come out and say this thing is backdoored is high. They're naming the company, they're naming the device.
Not the
Normally they'd be
IP,
very, but not the IP,
not the CNC.
which, well, but I'm trying to figure out what the functionality is here that, what does it do? Like, it just runs commands like arbitrarily, or because that's like a reverse shell, right? That I can understand that maybe being like the most irresponsible way for you to like do remote management, but that's still, it's fucking documented in the manual. They weren't hiding it from you. So like, what are we talking about?
But there's a real there is a security issue here. Whether we call it a
Yeah,
backdoor or
yeah,
an
yeah.
insecure feature or a feature that isn't properly implemented or whatever it is, there is a definite legitimate security issue, especially when you think of medical devices and these kind of things. I mean,
So, like the issue, if you want, like the security issue here is that if they want, let's say, the Chinese, and again, this is quote from the text, like this introduces risk to patient safety as a malfunctioning monitor could lead to improper responses to vital signs displayed by the device. So, if the Chinese wanted, they could change the vital signs displayed by the device, but you would know that it's them, it's the manufacturers of this device that they are changing, well, in theory, the vital signs.
the
Um,
weird the weird thing
but
about
like the other
eruptions.
side here
Yeah.
is if somebody somehow manages to hijack that IP address, same way that maybe Sequoia hijacked that plugx worm IP address, and then they could probably or possibly do like a lot of
At
bad
scale.
things, right? At scale, correct. But then again, like this IP address is not like some random IP address on the internet. It's like a very specific IP associated with a university in China. And I was thinking maybe some students wrote the firmware and they left that IP in the firmware because it was like their university test server. And that's like I'm not entirely confident or sure there's a malicious or like purpose behind this backdoor, if you want.
Juan, I'll ask the
I
question that Costin raised in the very beginning when we started talking about this, because this Context CMS 8000 it's also relabeled and resold by resellers. So there might be a bunch of hospitals here in the United States running this thing. It doesn't even say Contact on it. It might just have a different name. It's kind of like
Correct.
part of the
Yeah.
thing. How do these people respond to a CISA bulletin that says there's a dangerous backdoor in Contact pane? Like, where are we?
They won't even, I mean, I'll be surprised if they notice,
Or if
because
they
I'll
even
be
saw
surprised
this,
if
right?
this does anything, but
I'd be
and like
surprised if those folks have that thing working properly.
yeah, like
By the way, I've been spending a lot of time in hospitals lately, unfortunately, and I've seen a lot of these things, and I can guarantee to you that none of them are connected to the network. They're just like some dumb bricks sitting there by the hospital bed,
Right. Powered by a wire
showing your
plugged into
vital
something. Yeah.
signs, but they are not connected to the internet. That's a reality, at least not in Romania.
I look, even if they were, even if they are, like this is like the world of like insecure IoT, and like we were more spooked about it because of the like medical supposed implication.
Hmm.
But like, you know, again, like this is the kind of stuff where you go, okay, but we have no enforcement around software. We have no enforcement around, there's no software bill of materials. There's none of this
No
stuff. So like,
inspectability, the usual.
and there's no liability anywhere. There's no transitive liability anywhere down that stack. Like if you tell me that now that this has been put out there, a hospital that runs one of these machines is liable if something goes wrong, or like is liable to like their patients because they haven't protected them and whatever. Okay, fine. That you can see the purpose of putting this out there. And if the idea is to ban this company or whatever, okay, cool. If the idea is to show us a campaign and show us what's possible, like, well, not what's possible, but what's being done, much more interesting. But this to me, like, I I just think that the use of the term backdoor here is kind of it defeats the purpose of this, which is it would have been just fine for CISA to do what NCSC does and show, look, this software is vulnerable as shit. This
Yeah.
is why it's vulnerable. Evaluate that in your risk score however you see fit.
Go do
Instead,
something if you're at a hospital and maybe this thing
Yeah.
is connected to the internet. Yeah.
but this is like, this to me is alarmist in a way that, like, look, let's put ourselves in the shoes of like a hospital administrator. You have a million real emergencies to deal with, and then you probably have a million security concerns to deal with, and you want to avoid ransomware, and you have a bunch of Windows XP machines running MRIs, and like there's all this awful shit. And then
Here comes the
somebody
US
tells you,
cybersecurity.
yeah,
Not somebody tells you, but the US
right,
cybersecurity agency comes and says China backdoor medical devices can
yeah,
manipulate things.
right.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, so we're really supposed to prioritize this over what exactly? And like, what choices? This is what I always come down to with all this USG shit. It's like anytime they come down on a particular product, which is almost always a foreign product, like what is the market for alternatives look like? And I mean that genuinely.
You're
Like,
becoming Mr. China lately, I noticed.
no, dude, it's just I don't like how unstrategic the government is, because you are only going to get one of these bullets. You're not like, if you say that everyone in a hospital needs to run to like throw these, which are probably like, you have one per patient, right? Like one per
Per room,
like
yeah.
seat in the hospital. You have to go run, throw all of this shit away now and replace it with something else. And we're not telling you what to replace it with. There is no comprehensive evaluation of all other medical devices that provide similar functionality, such that we can say this is an outlier because it's super insecure, but all of the other ones are very secure, or something like that. Then what happens when everybody moves to, Acme Corporation, CMS, whatever? And then you go, oh no, Acme Corporation, CMS, whatever is also vulnerable. You go, well, fuck you. We just threw away 8,000 devices and had to buy new ones, which you didn't fund us to do. And like, what do you want us to do? Throw 8,000 away again and go look for something else? Get the fuck out of here. And that's what's going to happen with the TP-Link router thing. It's what's happening with things like this, where you go, it's not that you shouldn't tell people these things are vulnerable, but this is being thrown out like DEFCON stunt hacking.
Right.
Look at the shit I can do to this device. And you go, thanks, bro. Cool. No context, no order of priorities, no understanding of what the larger landscape looks like, no sense of prioritization. It's just stunt hacking.
Do you think this was in the backlog, the CISA backlog to go out the door, or do you think this is a new administration kind of?
No, I mean, they didn't write this shit in 2 days, right?
Yeah.
Like, but also, who wrote it, right? Like, is this CISA researchers? Like, you have some reversers back there who are just like fucking around with medical devices all day? Or
yeah, the
like,
alarmism is what's the problem here, right? It's the alarmist kind of backdoor China. You can modify data and do remote code execution because it was left in the firmware. It's like, oh my God, here is on fire. And then when you look at it, it's like you say.
Now do every webcam device and every router and every piece of hardware you buy for less than $100.
That's why we have 3 hours of shit to talk about on this podcast every week, right?
Go back to DeepSeek, bro.
We got two. I got 2 quick segments I want to get to, which is the standard segments. One is the VPN corner with Costin Raiu, Mr. VPN over here, who uses 10 VPNs and pushing everyone to VPNs. We have news from NordVPN that they're coming out with a new protocol that can bypass VPN blocking technologies. I read the document they put out. There's no details. It just feels like a lot of like fluff and vaporware. But Costin, why is this relevant?
Well, there's kind of a battle in the VPN sphere at the moment for companies to be able to sell to potential customers in Russia, Iran, and China, with these 3 being like the countries where most of the VPN blocking happens. Especially in Iran, for instance, almost everything is blocked, so people need to rely on all sort of tools to bypass that. Of course, same situation with the Great Firewall of China.
Same situation down south here in the US with people trying to get to Pornhub, right? It's
Correct,
like
correct. So if you want, like for instance, in Russia, there's Roskomnadzor who is blocking Proton VPN IPs. They're like blocking everything, like even blocking themselves sometimes out of caution. And I think that yeah, the real race here is to be able to deploy versions of these tools that can actually bypass the filtering in
cat and mouse. It's
China,
just typical
Iran,
cat and mouse.
Russia. Correct. By the way, like one of I think the pioneers, kind of experts in this field, is our good friend Mr. Stefan Tanase, with his service VPN Fail, which is not necessarily fail.
Wasn't
It's
he
actually
making some
quite
magic
good.
money with this shit recently?
I think he's well. Now that's the other issue, because if you want to sell in these countries, you won't be able to charge them
Real
green
money.
US dollars, right? You need to charge them some other sorts of things like magic monies, which is why, yeah, his solution VPN Fail relies on ton cryptocurrency, and I think most recently some other magic money that he founded and started. So yeah, they kind of go hand in hand. If you want to bypass that, you also need to take payments into account, and the fact that you, like, that country might actually block you. So let's say they say we're gonna block nordvpn.com, and good luck like trying to get this tool. And that's why,
So
for instance,
they're coming
yeah,
up with this
Stefan.
Whisper protocol,
No,
basically.
not necessarily, but like Stefan, for instance, only sells his solution through Telegram, because Telegram kind of, they have like their own problem being blocked in all these countries, so they're like trying to find ways around the blocking. So you can buy it only on Telegram. So it's like the never-ending cat and mouse game. If you want, me personally, I have a NordVPN subscription. What I don't like about it is that you cannot pay it fully in a fully anonymous fashion with cryptocurrencies, which is what you can do with Mulvad VPN and iVPN. Those you can buy with cryptocurrencies in a kind of anonymous manner, if you want.
And
That's
NordVPN is the
important.
NordVPN is the most visible one. I mean, you can't go to watch a YouTube video. They've purchased all the advertising
Like
on
everyone,
YouTube.
Lex
They're just
Friedman, whoever, like
correct.
everybody's
Who owns
advertising
NordVPN?
NordVPN. You are asking me who
Yeah, who
owns?
owns NordVPN? Because this, when you tell people use a VPN, use a VPN, use a VPN, my mind goes to who owns this VPN that I'm using. Am I just
Greenland, obviously.
Greenland?
We will buy them soon.
It's from the
It's the
north.
Lithuania guys, right?
Like what is important, by the way, what is important in my opinion, and by the way, this is also like a kind of a drawback. If the company who owns the VPN is like a real company that you can see, they exist, they've been around for many, many years, yeah, then maybe it's a bit more legitimate. But on the other hand, most of the guys who do the silent stuff in the shadows, they don't even have a company, they don't exist, nobody knows who's running that, nobody knows who is behind. So like sometimes the fact that it's a super well-known company doesn't necessarily mean that they're also super fully anonymous and trying to protect your privacy.
And the other segment, the other manual segment, is our Magic Money segment, which segues nicely. Juanito, your team just put out a new report on some very specific phishing on some Twitter high-profile targeting, some cryptocurrency organizations, U.S. political figures. What's the significance here?
We wanted to do like an interesting and very quick like flash, because we got this. Actually, one of the victims reached out yesterday, and Tom Hagel and Jim Walter and Alex Delamont all jumped on it, which I think is phenomenal. But essentially, they started to kind of dig down on this. We had a U.S. elected official who was getting targeted with this like X Twitter account takeover phishing. And when we started sort of spiraling out on the infrastructure, you see it's a much wider campaign. But interestingly, like these are the same dudes, whoever it is behind this, that hacked Linus Tech Tips and some like Linus Sebastian's shop and like a couple of other like Twitter accounts. And now we suspect this could be related to the Tor project losing access to their Twitter account. Recently, it looks like they may be going after like an ex-engineer and other cryptocurrency orgs. And of course, you get all this great access, and what are they using it for? It's just to like push cryptocurrency scams. So, it's just it seems to be an attempt to really push some of these scams through like really big influencers, and it's nothing to lose your mind over, but interesting activity to see as it's happening right now.
And if you are one of these influencers or you feel you're a target, what do you do? Just watch out for phishing, like be
I
more vigilant.
mean,
What's the
unique password, two-factor authentication, multi-factor enabled, etc. Don't click on links inside of, your usual emails. Pray, light candles, do the usual shit.
We got a quick breaking story out of Rafael Satter and Reuters. Not much details, but WhatsApp, Meta-owned WhatsApp, has caught Paragon Solutions, this Israeli spyware company targeting a bunch of its users, including journalists and members of civil society. That's all we have. There are no real details. WhatsApp says it will continue to protect people's thing. Paragon Solutions we know about, right, Costin? And this is again just probably using WhatsApp infrastructure to do some things. That's probably some 0-click or 1-click things on WhatsApp messaging. What do we think this is?
Well, it could very well be phishing through WhatsApp or exploitation through WhatsApp. But also, I think that in general, WhatsApp, they have, Meta, in practice, they have a very good threat intelligence team that is, since the famous story with Jeff Bezos, if I remember correctly, like the richest person in the world got owned by a 0-day through WhatsApp on his iPhone. So if like the richest guy in the world cannot stop these attacks, like what chance do we have? So I think that since that story, they've been kind of trying to improve the security in WhatsApp, but also to proactively go after these things, both I think on a technical and legal level. And in this case, what the article says that users such as journalists and members of civil society were being targeted by this spyware from Paragon Solutions.
And they're describing it as a hack. According to the reporting here, WhatsApp sent Paragon a cease and desist letter following the hack. I mean, I don't know what that's going to do. I mean, Apple tried to sue NSO and ran away from it. Like, help me understand.
That's really interesting because in December of last year, they announced that Paragon was getting bought by an American private equity
firm. Is this
firm.
the Ehud Barak company?
Yeah.
Ah.
So this suddenly looks a lot more interesting when you have an American equity firm that just earned a few $100 million buying this thing and subsequently now having to deal with the legal troubles that come with hacking
being
as a
here
service.
in the US, and being here in the US where you might have to respond to some of this cease and desist activity.
Well, this is where it's going to get really interesting with the Trump administration in ways that I think a lot of people seem to be very excited about. So one way that I could see this shifting in interesting ways is there is an expectation by a lot of the folks either leaving the IC right now or who have some insight at least into some of the suggested potential policy changes that the US government may become far more excited, open, and interested in having effectively third-party mercenary type shops that are actually doing what Vizzy affectionately refers to as soup to nuts operations, right? Like from beginning to end, actually doing all the hacking. And that's something that is incredibly complicated and largely unfeasible in the current legal or policy landscape in the United States. It's not to say that it isn't done, but there's all kinds of paperwork and OIA type shit where or you're developing 80% of the stuff and it has to go to a dude in a uniform to click the button and like stuff like that that also puts it under the same kind of policy narrow-mindedness that comes with a lot of the leadership in some of these shops. So I can tell you, hey, like Costin and I can do this operation beginning to end and get you the intel that you want or like give you an effect that you had asked for $500,000. And they're like, oh no, like we need to understand what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, what impact it could have, blah, 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 blah. And they talk themselves out of being able to do it. And then they try to do it internally. It costs $5 million and they never pull the trigger, right? Like there's all kinds of inefficiencies there that I think a lot of folks are trying to kind of get past. And the expectation now is that there's a lot of hope for folks that are starting to think about starting new companies, maybe taking in some funding for the VCs that are paying attention, that now is the time to grab a lot of the offensive talent that is escaping the government in droves, all of and put them into these private shops that may very well be getting licensed to do these things in the near future in this administration. I bring it up in the context of this Paragon thing because I think this is exactly the kind of case where we could see some of that develop, where you go, hey, an American defense contractor, private equity firm now owns this, what would have been a toxic asset because they do all these things that you're not supposed to do. What do you think? And this administration comes down the mountain and says, actually, we're perfectly happy with that. And that will fucking open the floodgates over here.
And that's not out of the bounds of like what that wouldn't shock or surprise anyone. Quickly,
no one in DC.
Shout out to Rafael and Reuters for getting the scoop on this. Usually when these stories appear, a Citizen Lab technical report follows. It kind of goes in tandem because they're kind of working together. Costin, you expect to see something later on around this?
I hope so. I mean, even like Meta can publish if they want to report on this with some IOCs. I think that would be very nice.
Please for some IOCs and samples.
Yeah, samples if there are samples. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion about exactly how these guys are like claiming to hack WhatsApp and Signal, and I think there was a lot of discussion about Signal, being insecure, and people were saying like, no, what they're doing, they're hacking the phone and harvesting messages from the Signal database. But in practice, one of the solutions with this kind of tools is that if you have a 0-day in WhatsApp or Signal or whatever, that is generally sufficient for you to extract the messages from that specific application. So you don't need to pawn the entire phone. That's the idea. And in such cases, it can even be more stealthy if you want. You're like triggering less alarms. And you don't even need to kind of survive any kind of reboots if you still like the cloud tokens from these apps and the messages are being synchronized to the cloud. You can keep an eye forever on the victims' discussions without even touching their phones.
Yeah, like the implants, the 10, 15, 20-year-old implants you talked about on these old networks, right?
Yes, which some people really enjoyed.
We're 2 hours and 10 minutes in, and I'm putting a bow on this. Juanito, let's close with some plugs and some shout outs. Who do you have?
One thing I wanted to mention, I was surprised not to see it in the show notes, but I think Politico had reported that our very own friend Alexei Bulasov may be returning to the Trump admin NSC as maybe dual-hatted NSC, like National Security Council and National Cyber Director, which I think is fucking huge, right? Like this is insane.
Who is Alexei? Give it a background.
Alexei, RPI Mafia, Alexei Bulasov is an excellent RE. He's a great researcher. I actually met him, I want to say in SummerCon years back when he was presenting on reverse engineering. What is it? The Microsoft endpoint product, the Defender. Yes, he was reversing Defender and showing some of the stuff at conferences. And so like this dude, super technical, knows his shit. He was actually involved in the NSC in the first Trump administration. And I mean, mostly I'm excited. Look, I haven't gotten to be excited about a lot of things in this gov, but like one of the issues, Well, look, one of the issues we've had with all of these positions, all of them, from CISA to the people at the NSC to the people at the ONCD, there have been great people that have shown up all over, but none of them, or next to none of them, have been technical. None of them have actually been technical. They may be passionate leaders with a lot of experience in cyber. They're all people who may have come from NSA and Cyber Command and whatever you want, but they were not technical
And it
people. They
makes a
needed
difference.
It makes a huge fucking difference, which is, even when you look at a report like what we were just talking about, like the difference between a backdoor and insecure configuration management system, it sounds like splitting hairs, but it fucking isn't. And it does make a difference, because at that point, what we were wondering with Jen Easterly and with Chris Inglis and Anne and all these folks, all of them amazing in their own way, was, well, who's advising them? Right? Like, do they have good enough technical people around? Can they dip into the pockets of the other parts of the IC of the US government that will give them the kind of technical insights that allow them to make good decisions?
Come on, man. We had big, massive advisory boards with Nicole Polrath, a bunch of
Yeah,
folks there
advisory
giving.
boards with like all of our friends from companies who like wouldn't have time to answer a fucking email, and we're still kind enough to do their time. But no, my point here is, this is an interesting development, I think, in the right direction. And like, cheers to Alexei. Like, I excited to see what they do. I think ONCD did really cool shit in the early days, the English days, when and they had amazing folks there, Joel and Amir and so on. And we were really engaged with them. And I was scared that that position was just going to disappear, because of all the contention between, the folks at the NSC and the folks at ONCD. Instead, we're seeing a dual hat, perhaps, on a technical person that we can, I'm excited. I'm interested to see what his policies are going to be. I don't know what he's going to espouse, but I think it's a move in the right direction for these positions.
Hopefully, he stays accessible and available, because, I mean, we follow him on Twitter. I believe he listens to the show as well. I believe I have some
Oh, I hope
evidence that he
so.
listens to the show as well. Costin, some shout outs, some plugs, any free advertising you have for anyone?
So I heard we have a lot of friends in the wonderful country of Luxembourg. So shout out to my friends there. They know who they are. They're doing like an amazing work. We can't get into details, but thank you for being our listeners.
New Luxembourg APT coming?
I
Maybe.
wouldn't know.
There's interesting people in Luxembourg. Sergio Coronado over there with the NATO folks. Like, there's some good dudes out there. They tried to get us to do a LabsCon Europe at some point in Luxembourg, which would be pretty interesting.
Quick shout out and welcome to all the listeners on Reddit. We got a mention on the Reddit cybersecurity subreddit with folks who actually listen to the show and are excited to listen to the show, and they really love the name of the show. Welcome aboard. We don't fact check. Hang out and you'll get some rants. Just some quick notes. Ellie Rustum's LabsCon talk is now available. It kind of looks at very, very deep layers of Chinese ownerships of corporations here in the US. It's up on YouTube. I'll put a link in the show description. Check that out. Juan, anything about LabsCon you can tell the folks? Are we starting to ramp up? What's going on?
We're starting to, we're in the very early days of signing up sponsors right now. We've had this amazing support from really great sponsors that have come back year after year. So we won't announce them just yet, but I'm extremely excited to see some of the folks return. In particular, look, this really matters. It's not just about it's not about money. It's not about lining pockets. We don't take a cent out of LabsCon. It's all burned. Like, it's all money we spend on the conference itself. So it's about making the conference work. And I don't think that we necessarily provide all of the bells and whistles that people are used to getting for sponsoring an RSA or Black Hat or whatever, because there's no vendor hall. We're not giving away our attendees' emails. We're not giving you undue influence on the crowd. Instead, we're giving them the opportunity to support a favorite, beloved venue for real security research. And I know that has made like massive impacts for a lot of the sponsors that have provided, but it's a bit of a leap of faith of saying, hey, you understand this community, you want to be a part of it, you want to support it. And there's, I want to say 5, 6 companies that have come through every year and have only stepped up and have been like excited to be a part of this. And I'm super thrilled to welcome them back. And also, of course, looking forward to the other folks that will join and support us so that we can keep this as small as it's been, as high quality as it's been, with no selling out, no bullshit. It's really important to get the right sponsors on board for that.
And more importantly, they get to embed themselves into the community and become like just build champions for whatever they're selling or providing to this audience. So I kind of echo what you just said. And then the last link from me is my friends at Binarly, who are big friends of the show. Juan mentioned them earlier, and they're also a LabsCon sponsor. Shipping, shout out to the engineers and the product teams, their research guys. They're shipping a really interesting post-quantum discovery and inventory technology this week. I think forward there's this is like hooey-fooey things for most of the folks on this show, but there's a lot of forward-looking companies that are facing deadlines for migration to these NIST standards, and just the ability to run a scan from binary and get the ability to figure out, where you're not compliant or how you start your migration is a big deal. And I saw this technology. I was fascinated by it. So shout out to those guys. And with that, it is now 2 hours and 19 minutes. All the minutes police should be
We're
happy
so
now.
close to the 3-hour mark, man. Those marathon runners out there.
The marathon runners will be happy that we went to a full 2 hours and 20 minutes. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I missed you last week. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, man.
Missed you too.
Likewise. And you see, Costin, not that high. Only one strange Romanian story. I think not too bad.
Ciao, ciao.
One, I said several. And jokes.
And true. The roundest number.